The airport was alive with its usual rush, but all eyes froze on a lone teenager standing quietly by the counter. His name? Barron Trump. Yet no one cared to look closer. Treated like an ordinary boy, dismissed, humiliated, until the moment his mother, Melania Trump, walked in. What happened next would leave the entire airport stunned and teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. Comments below, where are you watching from? And if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel, Life Inspirational and Motivational Tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The airport was bustling with the usual chaos of travelers rushing to catch flights, the hum of announcements echoing through the halls. Among the crowd, a tall, young teenager with striking features quietly made his way toward the check-in counter. Barron Trump, despite his recognizable last name, carried himself with a reserved demeanor, his expression calm and composed. Wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, he looked like any other teenager heading on a trip, yet his presence seemed to draw the subtle glances of those around him. As he approached the counter, the staff member on duty barely glanced up, her demeanor curt and dismissive. The line behind him was growing, and her tone suggested impatience rather than attentiveness. Barron, unfazed, politely handed over his ticket and ID. For a moment the staff member hesitated, her eyes darting between the documents and the teenager before her. Something unspoken passed in her gaze, a flicker of judgment perhaps, as her lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your booking," she said coldly, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. Barron looked at her calmly, confusion flickering in his eyes, but he chose not to argue. Instead, he asked politely if the matter could be resolved quickly. The staff member's response was anything but accommodating. She gestured for him to step aside, her tone growing sharper as she insisted he was holding up the line. Barron stepped away quietly, his presence almost unnoticed now, save for the few onlookers who had caught the exchange. The moment passed, but it was clear something was amiss, a tension hanging in the air that would soon unravel into a story no one could have anticipated. The clock ticked steadily in the airport lounge as Barron Trump stood awkwardly near the counter, his hands clasped around his carry-on bag. His quiet demeanor contrasted sharply with the impatient buzz of travelers weaving past him. He had complied with the staff member's abrupt instructions to step aside, but the humiliation of being singled out was beginning to sink in. He glanced toward the counter, hoping for some indication that his situation would soon be resolved. Instead, the staff member continued her work, pointedly ignoring him as she attended to other passengers. Barron's thoughts raced as he replayed the brief interaction. He had presented all the necessary documents, his ticket clearly valid. There was no logical reason for the holdup. Yet here he was, treated as though he had done something wrong. He tried not to let it show, but the whispers and curious glances from other travelers were beginning to sting. One man in a business suit muttered to his companion, "Isn't that the Trump kid? What's he doing here alone?" Another nearby traveler, a woman with a toddler in tow, shook her head disapprovingly. "Probably thinks he's above the rules. Typical." The assumptions were palpable, even from strangers who didn't know the full story. Barron adjusted his bag on his shoulder, his posture stiffening as he fought to maintain his composure. The scrutiny wasn't new to him. Being part of a high-profile family meant his every move was often analyzed. But this time, there was no family entourage, no security detail to shield him. He was just a teenager trying to catch a flight. Yet he couldn't escape the shadow of his last name. English. Expressing gratitude to the pilot without his family being concerned. Minutes turned into what felt like an eternity, and Barron decided to approach the counter again. With a calm yet firm tone, he asked, "Excuse me, ma'am, has there been any update? I really need to board my flight." The staff member barely glanced at him before responding. "Like I said, there's an issue with your booking. You'll have to wait until I can confirm things." Her voice carried a dismissiveness that cut deeper than any overt insult. Barron frowned, but before he could reply, she added, "And please, step back from the counter. You're making other passengers uncomfortable." Uncomfortable? Barron looked around, noting the eyes that quickly averted when they met his gaze. The weight of the situation pressed harder on him, but he refused to let it break him. With a small nod, he stepped back again, retreating to a corner where he could observe without drawing further attention. What he didn't notice was a young boy nearby, no older than 7, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Mom? Isn't that the boy from TV? The president's son?" The mother quickly hushed him, casting an uneasy glance toward Barron. Barron, meanwhile, stayed quiet, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He wasn't angry. He was hurt, confused, and frustrated. What had he done to deserve this kind of treatment? He thought about calling his mother, Melania, but hesitated. She was always protective, always ready to step in when something wasn't right. But he didn't want to trouble her. Not yet. Maybe this was something he could handle on his own. The staff member's behavior grew more pointed as time went on. She occasionally threw glances his way, her expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. To her, he was just another entitled kid expecting special treatment, and she wasn't about to bend the rules for him. But what rules? Barron's ticket was legitimate, his paperwork in order. The issue seemed to be less about logistics and more about perception. A quiet prejudice veiled under the guise of protocol. Nearby, a family watched the scene unfold. The father, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, leaned over to his wife and whispered, "Poor kid. He's being treated like a criminal for no reason. Doesn't seem right." The wife nodded, her gaze softening. "It's sad. Whatever you think of his family, he's just a child. This isn't fair. This isn't fair." Despite their murmured sympathy, no one stepped forward. People rarely did in situations like this. Most were content to observe from a safe distance, unwilling to get involved. And so Barron remained alone, his quiet strength masking the turmoil beneath. The emotional weight of the moment began to seep into the atmosphere, affecting even those who hadn't initially noticed. A young mother walked by with her child, her expression softening when she saw the boy standing in the corner, his shoulders slightly hunched. For a fleeting moment, she considered saying something to the staff, but the thought of confrontation held her back. Barron took a deep breath and leaned against the wall. He had faced public scrutiny before, but this felt different. This wasn't about politics or media coverage. It was personal. The staff member's indifference and the subtle judgment from others felt like an assault on his very identity. It was as if his presence alone was a problem, something to be managed and dismissed. As the tension in the air thickened, a small part of Barron wondered if he should walk away, find another way to resolve the issue. But another part of him, the part that had learned resilience from years in the public eye, refused to give up. He would wait, he would endure, and he would prove that he was more than the assumptions cast upon him. Unbeknownst to everyone, this was only the beginning of a series of events that would soon turn the airport upside down. Barron remained in the corner of the airport lounge, his tall frame blending into the background as the minutes dragged into hours. He had attempted to resolve the issue twice more, each time met with the same dismissive tone from the staff member, whose impatience now bordered on hostility. Passengers streamed past him, some glancing curiously, others ignoring him altogether. A few murmured among themselves, the fragments of their conversations filled with assumptions about him being a spoiled teenager, causing unnecessary drama. At one point, the staff member made a point to address the growing line, speaking loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm sorry for the delay, folks. We're dealing with a booking issue that's taking up extra time." Her eyes flicked toward Barron as if to place the blame squarely on his shoulders. Several people in line exchanged knowing looks, their whispered speculations amplifying Barron's discomfort. A woman with a stroller nearby leaned toward her husband and muttered, "This is why people like him need handlers. They think the world revolves around them. Barron heard the remark but chose not to react. His upbringing had taught him to remain calm under scrutiny, but inside he was grappling with a mix of emotions: frustration, embarrassment, and a growing sense of helplessness. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had done nothing wrong, but he knew his words would only be twisted or dismissed. The breaking point came when the staff member stepped away from the counter, her voice sharp and cutting as she addressed him. "You've been standing here long enough. If you're not going to cooperate, I'll have to ask you to leave the area. We can't have you loitering and disrupting other passengers." Barron blinked in disbelief. "But I've been waiting for you to resolve the issue. I'm not causing any disruption." She crossed her arms, her expression hardened. "I've explained the situation. If you're unwilling to wait elsewhere, I'll have to call security." A hush fell over the immediate area. The mention of security caught the attention of bystanders, and suddenly all eyes were on Barron. A couple of teenagers standing nearby pulled out their phones, ready to capture the moment. The humiliation was complete. Barron opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself. He knew that any further attempt to explain would likely escalate the situation. Instead, he stepped back once more, his hands gripping his carry-on tightly, his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his emotions in check. Unbeknownst to the staff member, her words had been overheard by someone standing near the entrance. A tall, elegant woman with a commanding presence. Melania Trump had arrived quietly, her sunglasses shielding her eyes as she scanned the scene. It had taken her only moments to recognize the familiar figure of her son standing apart, his body language stiff and defensive. Her heels clicked purposefully against the tiled floor as she approached, the sound drawing attention even before she spoke. Removing her sunglasses, she fixed the staff member with a piercing gaze that cut through the air like a knife. "Excuse me," Melania said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "Can you explain why my son has been treated this way?" The staff member froze, her demeanor shifting instantly. She stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating. I wasn't aware." "You weren't aware." Melania's tone remained composed, but her words carried the weight of her disapproval. "You weren't aware that this young man has been waiting here for hours, humiliated and ignored?" The staff member's face flushed as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Around them, the crowd began to murmur, the realization of who Barron was dawning on everyone. Phones were raised discreetly, capturing the moment as Melania's poised confrontation unfolded. "I will not tolerate my son being treated with such disrespect," Melania continued, her voice unwavering. "He provided all the necessary documents, yet you chose to dismiss him. This is unacceptable." Barron watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and awe. His mother's presence had instantly shifted the dynamics, her commanding aura silencing the whispers and drawing attention away from him. For the first time in hours, he felt seen, not as a symbol or a last name, but as a person who deserved respect. The staff member stammered out an apology, her earlier arrogance replaced with nervous humility. "I didn't realize, I thought..." "Well, you thought wrong," Melania interjected, her tone cutting but controlled. "I expect this matter to be resolved immediately. My son has waited long enough." The turning point was palpable. The once discriminating staff member now scrambled to address the issue, her hands shaking slightly as she typed into the computer. The bystanders, who had been content to watch silently, now seemed uncomfortable, their earlier judgments exposed as unfair and unfounded. Wow. As the tension eased, Barron felt a surge of gratitude for his mother. She had arrived just in time to turn the tide, her quiet strength and unwavering support a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. He stood a little taller, the weight of the earlier humiliation beginning to lift. But this was only the beginning of a resolution that would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The airport buzzed with activity as Melania and Barron Trump made their way towards security. The earlier events still lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed them. Barron walked silently beside his mother, his tall frame slightly relaxed now. He glanced at her, a mixture of gratitude and awe evident in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he couldn't quite put into words. Melania looked at him with a mother's unshakable love, her expression both reassuring and firm. "You don't need to thank me. It's important that people remember how to treat others, no matter who they are. That's a lesson worth teaching, no matter the situation." Barron nodded, absorbing her words. Despite the humiliation he had endured earlier, he now felt a sense of pride, not just in himself for handling it with grace, but in his mother for standing by him with dignity and strength. This wasn't the first time he had seen her handle a difficult situation, but today it felt personal. Back at the check-in counter, the staff member sat in silence, staring blankly at her computer screen. The crowd had dispersed, but the weight of her actions remained heavy on her. She thought about the dismissive tone she had used, the assumptions she had made without knowing the truth. Her earlier arrogance felt like a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of regret. They flew onward through the night, with a wind from the south. One of her colleagues approached cautiously. "That was a tough lesson, wasn't it?" they asked. The staff member nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I judged him before I even knew who he was. It wasn't just about his name. I treated him unfairly because I assumed the worst." The colleague placed a hand on her shoulder. "What matters is that you've realized it now. It's never too late to change how you see people." The words lingered in her mind as she vowed silently to approach her work and her life with more compassion. This wasn't just about a high profitable name. It was a lesson in humanity, one that would stay with her long after the moment had passed. For those who had witnessed the scene, it became more than just a story to share. It was a reminder that the way we treat others reflects who we are, not who they are. Strangers, who had initially judged Barron, began to reflect on their own biases. Parents quietly explained to their children the importance of kindness, using the events they had just witnessed as an example. The ripple effect of Melania's quiet yet powerful stance was undeniable. It wasn't her status or title that had commanded respect. It was her poise, her empathy, and her unwavering belief in treating everyone with dignity. As Barron and Melania reached their gate, the earlier tension had completely dissolved. Barron leaned over and whispered, "You always know exactly what to say." Melania smiled gently. "It's not about what you say, it's about what you do. People remember actions far longer than words." "Ha!" Barron looked out toward the runway, the words echoing in his mind. He knew that this moment, this lesson, would stay with him forever. This story is a powerful reminder of the importance of treating everyone with fairness and respect, regardless of assumptions or appearances. In a world often divided by misunderstandings, a simple act of kindness can have a profound impact. If this story resonated with you, share it with others. Like, comment, and subscribe to spread the message of compassion and humanity. Together, we can make the world a little kinder.